they can get some advice without anybody knowing who they are?
Yeah, so we all get a lot of inbound, and this is something that I dealt with as a practice owner. So somebody reaches out to me. They're in this kind of life phase. So let me lay the background, and then I specifically said, reach out to Dave Kittle, reach out to some others, because let's see what their perspectives are. And then I was like, hey, I'm talking to Dave tomorrow. Let me share it myself. So here's the deal. This person has been a private practice owner for several years. They've built a relatively successful practice. And I say relatively successful because we'll talk numbers. I don't know their numbers, but I know they're not at the level that they need to be to really sell to a larger like private equity or anything like that. And that was my problem. So I'm going to kind of bring in some of my case history, real life, real numbers, and then we'll talk about this situation. So he's going through a life change, starting a family, growing a family, I should say. And this person is like, I can't deal with the stress. There's too many ups and downs. I don't know if I'm going to make payroll. I don't know what's going to happen, in the next year, 3 years, 5 years, new baby coming, an existing child already, like my wife. It's too much for me to handle. I want to exit. I want to get out of this. I need something more stable. I want to be able to focus on my family. I want to set my priorities a little different. And I was in exactly the same boat. When I started the physical therapy practice, 2002 officially, but really 2000, 2001, I was single. I was living in my mom's basement. I had no car payments, no mortgage, like no family, no responsibilities. I could do anything I wanted to do, screw up anything I wanted to mess up, and I was totally fine. Now, fast forward, I had gotten married. We wanted to start a family. We knew we were going to change priorities from growing the business to being with our kids. And both my wife and I, that was our chief priority. We didn't want to be in the clinic from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. when we had a small family starting. So we looked at selling, and there was inbound coming. Somebody like Dave would reach out to me and be like, hey, you ever think about selling? But we didn't have the revenue. We definitely didn't have the profit. At least at that time, we had to be at like 2.5 million to 5 million EBITDA before anybody would even consider us on a larger scale. We weren't. We were like 1 million, 1.5 million in revenue. There was no way anybody was going to buy us. So then I was like, all right, so I can't go private equity or that route. What are my other options? Obviously, I could just close it, but I didn't want to do that. We had 5 clinic locations. We were in Florida and Ohio. I had contracts with third-party payers that nobody else was able to get because the contracts had been shut down. So I'm like, well, I've got value here. I could either look internally, or I could look at potentially a therapist who wants to get started, wants to go into ownership. They don't own already, but they're looking to buy. My concern with that is they don't have the experience of being a business owner. Right. When a therapist has been a therapist and they're good at being a therapist, to step into a big commitment of buying and owning a business, you haven't developed those skills. You haven't done the reps. And so I would feel just so guilty selling a practice to a therapist who has no experience running a practice, especially a practice like ours that was big enough that it would be an expensive purchase, but didn't have the infrastructure like a Fortune 500 company. We went the route of, we had a great team. They had been running the business themselves in Florida while we were in Ohio already. They knew all the warts. They knew all the bumps. They knew all the skeletons in the closet. They knew exactly what they were getting into. You guys have heard me say it before. We came to a 3 times multiple on net profit. I was faced with the decision that I needed to get out. If I didn't sell to these guys, which I'm so happy I did, that they were just going to leave and do their own thing anyway. And then I'd have to find new staff and more time commitment. So we came to an agreement. They had financial backing. They bought me out. They have full ownership. They exploded the profits. They exploded the growth. They opened 3 new practices or practice locations, then grew to 7, I think, right now. So it was amazing. It was amazing for all of us. But I do have some creative ideas for a therapist like the one who reached out to me. He does have 2 working physical therapists. He has a working physical therapist assistant, and he has an administrative person and a practice manager. So he does have some structure. He does have something that actually could sustain and go on its own. All of that being said, Dave, this is more in your world. What are you thinking?
Well, so right off the bat, I don't know if things have changed, but there are definitely more buyers that are okay with acquiring or partnering with practices that are, even a million in revenue, and sometimes even less. Like I've heard of this guy Donnie Orengi I had on my show with Main
Yeah.
Street Therapy Partners, and they have like 14 or something locations, and he was saying like, yeah, we're interested in practices that are doing like 500 to 750K in revenue, so even smaller, maybe like 2 therapists or 3 or 2.5 or something like that.
So hold on a second. So don't go. So this is like great because I don't know anything about this. Why now? Is this a shift? Why now is this like an option now that the revenue can be lower and people are still interested?
I mean, maybe it depends on what's out there and what's available. It
Yeah.
depends on
Market.
like the market and deal flow. Before, like, let's say, I mean, there's always been consolidation. There always is consolidation in every market. Every market is like, fragmented, all these service-based businesses. And so there's been more of the buyers buying up practices. I mean, it's been happening for 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, it's been happening forever. So now maybe it's just like there's less of the chains that have 3, 5, 7, 10 locations, but there's more of the onesies, more of the like the smaller locations.
Got it. All right. So obviously, let's go through the different ways because the title of the episode, the thing we sort of teased was creative ways. So you could sell to someone, you can sell a big company. Tony, you talked about handing over the reins or selling internally to people who sort of already were under the hood already. What are the other different ways? Because if you look at a situation for one, and there's only one solution, I think you're really myopic. I think right off the bat, there's a bunch of different ways. And then Dave brings in, there are companies that are willing to buy solo practices that have $500,000 in revenue. So there are options. What are the different ways? What are the different creative things that people can think about?
Something that I've been thinking more about is not selling, right? We see this wave that's coming. So all the baby boomers and all the guys like me, we're getting to the point where we've built these businesses. We're not going to keep running these businesses. We're primary operators. In fact, another conversation we should have. I sat down this weekend. I talked to 2 other business owners, way bigger businesses than mine, but one was a plumber and one was in the printing business. And it's so fascinating because it's exactly the same thing. Their husbands, their dads, they don't have kids that are going to take over their business. Their business is in the multiple millions, but still not really an acquisition target for anybody bigger.
Right.
And so they're like, I don't know, this business is spitting out tons of cash. We have great lifestyles, but what's going to happen when I hit 60, 70, 80, and I don't want to be the primary operator?
Right.
So it's a big issue across all industry, not just PT. Honestly, I looked at this situation. I said, you know what? I wonder if you would go get a job, whether it's a clinical or non-clinical job, but you have this business. It sounds totally bizarre. You have this business, you go get a job. You get a job at 80 to 120,000 a year. You get a 40-hour work week. You get benefits. You get vacation. You get all of the luxuries that a W-2 employee gets. But and you don't close your business. You just let it continue to operate. Like I know for myself, I will put a business on the back burner, even if it's not making money, even if it's losing a little bit of money. I'll just park it somewhere, let it continue to operate, because I know at some point, one day, I might come back to it. I might do something with it. I don't need to sell it, because if I sell it, I'm not going to get anything for it. I don't need to shut it down because it's doing okay. It's not doing great enough that I want it to be my primary focus, but it's also not doing bad enough that it has no future value. And so for this individual, I feel like they're already looking at get a job, because I said, well, what happens if you do sell it? They're like, well, I'll get a job, something more stable, all the things that I just said.
Right.
And I was like, what if you just did that and didn't do anything with the business? Just let your staff keep running it. Let it continue to live, put it on life support while you're focused on family and while you're focused on a stable income and doing the other stuff. What do you guys think about something like that?
It doesn't make sense. I don't know if something's not adding up, but you were saying, I know we're not mentioning who it is. I don't even know who it is, but you said a rural clinic somewhere in the US, and they have, 2 PTs themselves. The owner is a third PT, and then there's a PTA, correct?
Correct.
And then office people.
and then office and admin staff. So I don't know, like, I guess they're all in-network contracts and they're not doing well, or they're not marketing well. It doesn't make sense as to why this individual is not afloat.
It feels like bar rescue. Like Dave's like sniffing. He's like there's it's people, product, process, right? He's like, one of these things is not working right. And you got to figure out what it is. That's what a stress test is.
I can tell you, I feel like I've been in his exact situation.
Right.
So my best thing is I'll share my experience. My experience is I would be afloat like right now. You know, I'm not the primary person in the clinic. My clinic is running right now. I'm going to leave here at 9:30. I'm going to go do, I think I've got 4 or 5 evaluations today, a handful of evaluations tomorrow. Like I'll float in, I'll do those evals, I'll get back out. But it's like, I'm not focused on the business enough to continue to grow it. I'm not focused on the business enough to really care about it that much, be passionate about it that much. It's just there. It's just, again, on life support. So because of that, I've got other priorities. I'm focused on other things. This individual might be focused on family, but the idea is, I think that's where this person probably is.
So if you're going to look at that from Marcus Lemonis, people, product, process, it's a people thing. This was a great idea 4 years ago, but his life changed, or her life changed. Like that is valid and that is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
So for this practice owner, he wants to focus on, he's got the second child coming. He wants to focus more on family. I don't think he should necessarily sell. I think maybe, like you said, talk to your team. Maybe someone maybe one of the therapists either has money or can get access to capital and buy in, 20, 30, 40, 50 something percent of the practice. You'll have to do like an internal evaluation of here's the value of the practice. Maybe you sell some of the equity to your team. Then, and you can maybe give away some, free founders equity and then have them pay for additional equity or whatever. But then you could spend more time with your family. You can almost kind of do like the Tony Maritato role and kind of float in and out, but not be like, chained and cuffed to the clinic. And then if your staff have some of the equity, they're going to obviously work like a partner, like a founder, co-founder, and they're going to have skin in the game. And typically that would help the practice grow and be more stable. You can coach them a little bit, get them some mentorship and coaching. If you're too busy, then you got to pay for them to get coaching and mentorship by Tony or somebody else, but then have some of your team members have equity in the practice. That'll, I would say, arguably make it a little bit more independent of you.
Right. There's a place that sells like wood sheds and sheds in the backyard, and you can buy it straight up outright, or you can rent to own, right? Like, so I know dentists were big in this, right? Which is, if I'm like a 50, 60-year-old dentist, I'm looking for somebody who's just out of school, and you're just going to work for me. And then over the years, I'm going to sort of dip and you're going to sort of take over. But it's baked into the cake from the start, which is like, yes, you're going to draw a salary. And then over time, the salary might reduce, or maybe it'll stay the same or something. But now you're equity in this. And I can sort of, you pull that Homer Simpson gif, right? The Homer Simpson where Homer Simpson's in front of the bush and he just sort of fades back. And then nobody knows, because that person that you brought in was sort of there and he's the new guy. And next thing you know, it's that fade in, fade out kind of idea. I mean, that's a longer term. This person doesn't like, they might not necessarily have that. But Tony's saying, like, why bury this thing? Why not just park it and do something else and let's see how the thing runs?
So not to sound condescending, but I do think the listeners who are sitting in this seat right now are thinking, isn't that cute? Dave thinks that my employees want the responsibility of business ownership.
Well, I'm not saying you gotta know your team, and there's probably one that has the interest of like maybe learning some operations. Maybe they do some pseudo clinic director roles or whatever. You're right. If they're all clinical and they have no leadership experience or no managerial experience, and they're not talking about, hey, we got to, work on billable units and we got to work on getting cancellations lower and arrival rates higher. Like if they're not saying any of that, then you might not even have the right person on the bus for that.
Yeah, I'll tell the viewers, same thing. So I was in that boat multiple times. I've had multiple team members that I'm like, man, you would be so good. Why don't you just come in 20% equity and then you can, buy it out? We looked at US Physical Therapy's model of limited partnership and how they work their percentages. We've tried multiple models over 22 plus years. And I can tell you that I've had one who actually did it, obviously. The rest of them, now I've had other people that went on to be owners, but none of those, and they're successful owners, but none of those people who have done that were ever either willing or interested in being an initial like limited partner and then growing out into full ownership. Maybe I didn't present it correctly. I don't know, but the best clinicians, the best team members, the best staff, none of them ever wanted to go that direction, and partly I don't blame them. I mean, again, most of us go into PT because we want to help people, not because we want to run a business. There's a small sliver of us that find passion in actual business ownership and operation. So I think, again, for this individual, I said exactly what you said. I was like, look, just, you can owner finance, see if they can come up with 10, 20%, that this way they have some skin in the game. But I don't think that anyone on the team wants to do that. And I think with the rural status, it's hard to bring in therapists that want to live in that area unless they grew up in that area. And now they want to come back home, which is kind of a possibility, but it's slim to none. So, it's a challenge. So that's where I said, well, if I'm in his shoes and I go out and I get an $80,000 to $120,000 guaranteed income, now my business doesn't have to be profitable anymore. If anything, it could even lose a little money and I'd still be okay because I still have the value of that asset.
Right.
So that when my kids are in high school, when my kids are older, I can come back to it. And that's what I'm doing right now. My 2 clinic locations, they don't do a fraction of what they should. But I know that one day I can always come back to it. I could always pour gas back on that fire. As long as I keep an ember lit, it doesn't have to be a raging inferno right now, and I can put my time into the other things that I want to do. So that's my advice to this individual. And I'm sure this person's watching. I would seriously consider not shutting it down, not even selling it unless like a unicorn comes along and it's a perfect scenario. Instead, I would just let it continue to operate. I would get a full-time job, and then I would use that to provide me the lifestyle that I'm looking for.
Another different route would be he goes and finds another job. He gets not us, we're not brokers or advisors, but you get a broker advisor or your lawyer, your accountant, whoever. You get one of those individuals to cold message or send a letter or an email or whatever to USPH, Athletico, ATI, who are the other buyers, wherever rural, I don't know. Those are, NovaCare, Select Medical, whatever, like any of those top 4 or whatever. You get one of your broker, advisor, lawyer, accountant, whatever, to send a cold email, cold letter, whatever, to them and say, hey, this is so-and-so at this, this location. We are currently speaking with potential buyers. And it's almost like, hey, we're letting you know in case you want to throw a bid in and
Right.
throw your hat in the ring. That's another way to kind of drum up interest.
Right.
At the same, like if you're truly, truly wanting to get out and this is not for you and you have no one to take over, you have no one to buy in. That's another way to kind of get almost like you want to have like a blind bidding war and say, hey, we're collecting bids over the next 2 to 3 or 4 or whatever weeks at this date. We're going to, look at the highest bids I'm sorry, not the highest bid. They'll say, we're looking for the best opportunity, which basically means like the most amount of money or the best, terms
Right.
or whatever. But they'll say, we're looking for the best opportunity here. And that's another way to get more interest from potential buyers if there's no way of selling some equity and retaining the practice.
It's blind date, man. You got I forget the term. Like there's a Jewish term, like the woman who sets up all the couples in the neighborhood. Like she knows matchmaking, but there's like a Jewish term that like the word just sounds like it's like an onomatopoeia, like the word sounds like the thing, but it's putting the feelers out there. Listen, we're not in panic mode, right? Like we don't need this right now, but hey, maybe that little itty bitty practice wasn't on the radar, but that area of the country might have been on the expansion map in a year or 3 or 5. And now it's okay. It's not a cold outreach now because that person was on our radar 3 years ago and they're still in business. Okay. All right. Got it.
Is the word yentas?
Yenta, that's it. Yeah, the Yenta of the
I had
neighborhood.
to,
The person that
Google it.
you know, this is what like in 80s and 90s sitcoms have taught me is like all these little like stereotypes. Like that's what it gave me. Like that's why I knew what a Yenta was. I have no idea what 80s or 90s sitcom brought me that, but that was it.